Boys, get the tools. What tools? The tools we've been using for the last 10 years. Hurry up. Those tools.
Hi, everybody. We are very happy to have Erwan Leroy back after 3 years. It was about 3 years? You were at Weta Digital, right? Or you were about to start Weta was when we saw you last. And
that's right, yeah.
It's been a while, so it's great to have you back post the apocalypse of the pandemic. You are currently VFX supervisor, lead pipeline developer at Crafty Apes VFX in Vancouver. Recently, the last time we were talking to you, you were starting Weta Digital, and it seems like you were there for 2 years. Pipeline technical director, compositor, and then of course you've worked at Spin VFX, again Weta, and you're known for really letting out a lot of like really cool tools and so forth that people have used. I've used many times. Sure, everybody has probably messed with them. A couple of the tools I believe are in Tony Lyons' Nuke Survival Toolkit, but there are other tools that you're going to show, I believe, today that are going to be kind of things that are with your GitHub and with also on Nukepedia as well. So thanks for coming on. If you guys are interested in just learn more about Erwan, you can go to erwanleroy.com and learn more about some of his stuff. He has a blog site that kind of goes over some of his plugins and so forth, and just different tutorials. His IMDB, he's worked for Kingsman, Invasion, Eternals, Justice League, Asteroid Hunters, the Christmas Chronicles Part 2, many films, and I had just learned about Crafty Apes being in Vancouver. It's growing immensely. So Erwan, what's it like living and working in Vancouver versus where you've been for the last 2 years before that, which was New Zealand?
Yeah, so we just moved back to Vancouver earlier this year. We really loved living in New Zealand, and Wellington was a really beautiful city. Vancouver is almost very similar, but in a much bigger scale. Wellington is about 500,000 people living there. Greater Vancouver, I think, is 4 to 5 million. I might be giving really wrong numbers right here, but yeah, it's a big city, and it's we're still adapting to the scale of the city. Where in Wellington you can be anywhere in the city very quickly, and here we have to deal with traffic again and walking to the public transportation, and then take a bus, and then take a metro, and then take another bus to get where you need to go. So yeah, it's definitely a much bigger scale. It's a real city.
We have you on today because you've been nice enough to bring forth a demonstration of some of the tool sets that you've built and that you've shared. So if you don't mind, should we just jump over to your computer right now?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so we have switched over to Erwan's computer here. He's using some of the footage from the previously long and boring tutorial series. And he's going to go ahead and demonstrate some tools, I think. Take it away, Erwan.
Yeah. So before we started recording this, you told me that you're interested in seeing some of the spin tools and some of the Nuke Vector Matrix toolset as well. So I'm just going to cover a bit of a mix and match of both. That's mostly the two sort of series of tools that I've released. There might be a few random things here and there, but I haven't really released too many things recently, or I just kind of like do slightly more experimental things that I put on the blog, and some people make it into real tools. So both the Nuke Vector Matrix and the spin tools are available on GitHub as well as Nukepedia. The spin tools are this little icon, and there's just a few of them available. And the Nuke Vector Matrix just reused one of the icons, I think, from one of those grades somewhere here, the math icon, and its tools to deal with vectors and matrices, and that's in collaboration with Mathieu Goulet-Amba, which is in Montreal.
And we'll provide the links to these two, if you guys are curious, at the bottom of the description.
Yep. So yeah, definitely the more, I guess, creative and day-to-day tools would be the spin tools. Those are tools that we made in production for production, and our generic tools. We have things like glow exponentials that buttons, sorry, things to glow. That glow exponential is really similar to a lot of other exponential glows that you'd find online. We just sort of make sure that the intensity would be equal to the footage, so that no matter how big your size is or your fall off, that it tries to sort of keep the same brightness overall, because some of the tools we found before that would just explode in intensity as we adjusted them. So this is the same but normalized, so only that intensity knob actually makes it brighter. And we have a little range control which lets you key which part is getting glowed. So just a luma key, essentially. You can say I just want really the very brightest thing to glow, or I want everything to glow, or even just the darkest, but that would be weird.
Cool.
With just a bunch of options.
Would there be any tools that are in the default Nuke that you're like, stay away from this as far as glows?
Well, the default glow is
Pretty
fairly, sorry, a bit sticky here. The default glow tool is just never really produced quite the results that I would be expecting from a glow. It's not very natural looking, which is why everybody is using exponential glows, and there's like 52 versions on Nukepedia. But just decided to add a 53rd, so that was one of them. Probably not going to go over all the tools, but one that I like that I found people didn't necessarily know about is the Suppress RGB CMY, which basically separates the image into 6 channels instead of the regular 3, and you can control them separately. So for example, if I wanted to control the green on the side here, just the green slider would allow me to desaturate that green. Now I'll bring it all the way back to 0. It still looks kind of green, but that's probably the yellow. And that's our yellow. That counts as the yellow channel.
Can make the upside down all gray and blue.
You can all gray. You can also sort of separate it, and you've got this luma control which lets you suppress the luminosity of the channel as well. And not funny, but an interesting way of using that is you can actually tint that and introduce color. So I could say, oh, the thing that was yellow, I want it to be red now. And you can just kind of create this interesting...
It's giving some really crazy results with that little canyon.
and some pretty crazy results, and the pants haven't changed at all. The pants, I guess, are mostly in the cyan channel, and maybe we wanted him to have, I don't know, purple pants. So you can, I don't know, just choose a color and maybe bluer and less cyan. You can use that for grading. You can use that for helping with spill. You can help just kind of overall, like I've done shots where somebody's like, hey, change the color of this machine into this other machine, and I just kind of went there and suppressed the color that they wanted to change and replace it with another one. So that's one that I like. And then, I think it wasn't necessarily used enough. Another one, which I think is a bit more well-known, but is Chromatic. Again, there's probably 22 chromatic aberration tools on Nukepedia. Chromatic was my attempt actually working with Mads Hagbarth, who was working on something similar at the time, and we collaborated, and sort of like I made a version and sent it to him, and he made a version, sent it back to me, and we were like, hey, we could do this and do that, and he ended up with one version, and I ended up with this, so there will be like a lot of similarities between his tool and this one. But yeah, the the attempt was to get a full rainbow chromatic aberration, because so frequently you see somebody want to do a chromatic aberration, they'll do a transform, and they'll transform just the red channel by like 0.0, they'll do like a very little scale and copy it back in there. So they'll just copy like the red channel back to the red channel, and then you get, I'm just trying to see where I can see some chromatic aberration. But yeah, you get this sort of channel separation. But if you go to very big values, you just end up with completely separated image. It's not looking like an actual chromatic aberration. So we wanted to have something that has a full rainbow type of effect, and so that's what the chromatic was for. That will actually, even if you crank the values fairly high, you get a full rainbow. There's a bunch of controls to affect the way the fall off works, and you can protect your center. Okay. Yeah, you can do pretty crazy rainbow effects. You can maybe you say you don't want the center to be affected, so you can start protecting.
So just adjust.
Image,
It basically adjusts. You can adjust the fall off from center to the outskirts of the frame. Oh yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So this value here is a percentage of the whole image. So if you go all the way to 1, then your center is the whole image, the whole diagonal. If I move my center to somewhere, that should. No, I think if I go all the way to 1, I just turn it off. Yeah. So it's the radius of the diagonal of your image, and then that's harshness is how smooth it goes from being fully protected to not very protected. So it's kind of a bit of a. Sorry, my machine is really old, and you gave me 4K footage.
Yeah, I've seen. What was it? I was watching some documentary and. How much everyone's going away from the, I think it was Hugo's desk was going over the Batman movie and how they're using these old school lenses, and there's all this, they're kind of moving away from the clinical look, sharp clinical look, and they're just going back to these, anamorphic lenses with all these flaws, and you're sitting there trying to match this craziness,
and crazy flares and. Yeah, and now something that maybe not many people know about this tool is that it's actually 2 different groups inside, and you can, if you copy the 2 group, there are 2 main groups inside, and one is simply a radial vector generator that is generating the vectors that will get stretched right here. And the other one is the chromatic one, and that can, if you extract this, you can essentially use it with any kind of vectors. It doesn't necessarily have to be, sticky. It doesn't have to be the radial vectors that I use here. You can use some vector that you generate somewhere else. Let's say.
Oh, you just plug it in, yeah.
Let's remove this expression. And be patient. So we had an embarrassing crash, but I've rebuilt what I was just showing. I think my values are just a little bit too high before I do that, and my machine is not the newest. But yeah, inside the chromatic, you'll see this tool named Vector Chromatic. And if you plug in a vector map, I just use this noise, in there, you can actually create chromatic aberration from any old map. It's the same as distortion. Instead of being driven through radial vectors, it's being driven by custom vector map. So in there you have control over the size, so I can reduce that to much smaller amount. You can offset the direction of the vectors, so that would be if you imagine a point and a vector going that way, it's whether it stretches in one direction or whether it stretches both ways. So by default, it's the offset set to 0. It's similar to motion blur, essentially, if I was to put a vector blur.
You're converting a file with the use of your tool, Luma to vector, correct, up there?
That's correct, yeah. Well, I'm going to cover that a little bit later. If I was to use a vector blur, and I guess I got to copy the.
And for those watching it watching at home, if you guys recall, we did go over a couple of videos before of Erwan's like transform utilities, where we combined two transforms into one, so we would get accurate motion blur. So that's something that does come along with this plugin when you install it, I believe, correct? Because
yeah, those. I think they're actually in the survival toolkit, most of them.
Okay, yeah. But I don't think the transform utilities was. That was something you had to...
No, that's with the Python that comes with it, so I don't know if Tony included that in the toolkit. So if I use the motion, great. Forward, I did copy forward U and forward V. So it doesn't, why? Vector blur input is missing forward U, forward V. No, it's not. You're lying to me. Oh, forward V. Backward V. There we go. So I had cranked that by 150. So if I set the motion amount to 150, we should get essentially this. Well, not the same because my offset is different. There's an offset here as well, so it might just be. Still processing. But yeah, essentially, the chromatic is a vector blur that, as it goes through the samples, changes colors. On top of that, you have full control over the rainbow. So if you select these curves, that controls the rainbow effect. So we got this curve that's meant to match closely the wavelength and how a wavelength converts to RGB. But you can mess with it and make it kind of anything you want. I don't. Sorry, it's very slow. But yeah, you can play with the gradient and break it.
This is bringing back memories. I believe when we had Tony Lyons on for his Nuke Survival Toolkit, he did demonstrate this. He was like super excited to show it. I believe this is in the toolkit, if I'm not mistaken.
It is.
Yeah.
I think if I reset those curves, we'll just end up with a motion blur. And I broke everything because it reset everything. Just reset the curve. Anyway. Oh, this is embarrassing. I forgot how to use Nuke. That's what you get for not comping for 2 years. No.
How much of in regards to your pipeline job, do you really touch Nuke, or if not at all? Like,
I do very little comping. I do no comping at all. I might be open Nuke to test the pipeline and open Nuke to test tools and debug tools and debug broken scripts. And yeah, like I basically barely put nodes after another node except for making tools. I thought there was, oh, here, stupid, it's right here.
So right now you're building you're like the go-to guy at Crafty Apes in regards to building tool sets for them.
No, basically just working on the core pipeline. We're doing a lot of work. Crafty, give a bit of a history, is a 10-year-old, 11-year-old company, I believe now. They started in 2011. And for a long time, it was a fairly small company, but recently they really started growing at a really, really fast pace. And you suddenly have 7 locations, over 600 employees. There's a lot of work to do to make sure that the pipeline scales at the same rate as the company. So that's what I'm mostly working on at the moment. As you mentioned before, my job title is VFX supervisor / lead pipeline developer. And for the last 3 months that I've been at the company, I've been really focusing on the pipeline developer side of things. We'll see about the VFX supervision side of things later down the line, or it might never happen. We'll see. But that was something I wanted to get back to. I haven't done it for a few years, and they were very flexible in saying like, yeah, if you're interested in supervising again, we're willing to give you that title. And so this should happen down the line. But yeah, for right now, just like there's a lot of work in pipeline. We're hiring quite a few pipeline developers as well, and trying to make sure the company's pipeline can scale to 600 artists.
That's quite a task.
It is a big task. Yeah. Anyway, to get back to this, if we reset the RGB curves, we end up with no chromatic aberration whatsoever, and this is just essentially a vector blur. Another thing you can control is the number of samples. It's trying to be smart, so if you have a very small distortion somewhere, it's going to use less samples, and if it's got a very long distortion somewhere, it's going to use more samples, up to 150. But if I said, for example, 10 samples maximum, you start seeing these samples there. And yeah, you can go pretty low, like just say 5 samples everywhere, and it's quite a few effects you can achieve with that. So that's if you dig inside the chromatic. Yeah, what else should we cover? Spill correct. I think most people know the spill correct already. I've done a few demos of it over the years. This is built on top of Dispill Madness. So we took Dispill Madness and added a couple of things. So one of the differences is instead of picking between green or blue, you have a speaker, and you can pick your color just by picking through your image, and it will automatically pick between red, green, or blue depending on what has the more of that color that you pick. So that would be blue if I pick right here, and that would be green if I pick here, and it would be red if I pick here. And you have the same algorithm as what spill correct offers, but on top of that you have a key spill algorithm, which is something I implemented on top of it, and it's using some of the math from the IBK keyer. Let's go back to green keyer. So the fine tune is also based on Dispill Madness. There's this fine tune thing that lets you adjust, how much you want to dispill. And there is a neutralize color button. It's not really useful on this image. I was already color balanced, but imagine you had you received a plate that was already tinted green, maybe. And now you have quite a bit of green on areas that it's not actually spill, it's just the whole thing is green. You may not want to dispill this, because then the client might be like, hey, you're removing the green from our green image. You're working on the matrix, maybe the matrix, everything's green. You don't want to dispill it. So you can use this neutralized color, which is essentially a white balance. And if you pick, say, this area, you say this area, we don't want to dispill this area. That's not actual spill. That's just what gray looks like. Now it doesn't actually go away anymore. It just keeps that color.
And that's the addition that you put upon this as well. That's something you added on to this plugin.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I did. I don't think that Dispill Madness has that. Dispill Madness might have the replace. I forget exactly what it offered by default. I know those 5 algorithms there are from Dispill Madness itself. This one was added. I don't remember exactly what was, if there was some replacement options.
So does anybody build upon yours?
I don't know.
Okay.
Another Dispill I really like is Adrian Puyo's AP Dispill. That's
that's a great tool.
It's a good one, and I haven't had a chance, but I'm really hoping to go back, dig in there, and steal everything that it has that I don't have.
Yeah, there's this like whole debate. Oh, I use this tool, that tool. Somebody should set up a hierarchy of like, or at least this is great for this, whereas this despill is great for this, or spill suppressor is good for this, because there's so many people saying, "Oh, that's old school." I get this a lot. I get people like emailing me, "Oh, that's old school. What are you using that for?" And I'm just crying out loud. Like I said, "Okay, what's new school?" And then they don't respond.
Yeah. One thing that I've added as well that wasn't on Dispill Madness is, so I don't remember if it had the replacement color or not. So that's essentially IBK or some of the tools are doing a full spill suppression, but we want to maintain luminance, and that would allow you to control the luminance of what is replaced with. Can also gamma it up and down. It doesn't do anything in this case, but you can put an image in the back. So for example, I could use your plate in the back if that was my background. There's this BG input, and by connecting that,
wow, that's not bad.
It goes in there. So it's almost doing like an IBK key, but you can start like gaining that up and down and gammaing it up and down. I usually like to blur that, so that, because this is essentially going to end up being my foreground plate, that I'm not going to use that as a key. That's not an actual proper key, but just so that my spill is using the spill from the background, and then I'll do like an actual
do the actual key
an
itself.
actual IBK thing. I'll key that. I'll say it's green. It's terrible. Why is it not working? I'm just going to embarrass myself trying to key. Because I got a pick. There we go.
That's the fun part of being in front of so many compositors in front of all around the world. It's like, what's he doing? He's doing the wrong thing. That's my problem.
Anyway,
I just throw this stuff out there and say, show a little mercy. I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. I'll pull my key, and then I'll copy my alpha in there, and then pre-mult, and yeah, basically that'll be my foreground plate, and I'll just control my spill through that. So yeah, that's the spill correct. I like that little guy.
Yeah, that does a pretty great job. And if you have to change something that's extremely bright to extremely dark, such a luminous difference there, it does a pretty good job.
I mean, I rarely see in real life a single spill or a single key. Usually you get like, with a big script with like multiple dispills and multiple keyers and multiple rotos to get your final result. We've got some erode tools. I think there's no point really going over all that. More of these always been covered quite a few times. Yeah, I think that's essentially what's worth showing. The noise study is pretty cool. It's also based on Matt's algorithm for 4D noise, but it was improved upon a little. Oh, just built upon. I feel I'm more of a recycling person than necessarily somebody who invents stuff from scratch.
Reinvents the wheel, or just invents the wheel.
Yeah. So from a position pass, and right, So it's a noise. By default, it's using a flat card as the input. You can create a spherical noise as well if you want to put that onto a sphere. So if I make a 3D sphere and input that image on it, sorry, it's laggy. Let's put a white alpha in there. There you go. So we've got a seamless spherical noise. So that's the spherical input. Same thing for a cylinder. If you just wanted so this one will tile left and right, but not at the top. So I've got my pinching on top because that's not a cylinder, but come on. There's no sim by going around. There's a 4D cylinder, which is kind of a weird one, but okay, so we're back. So we have the cylinder 4D, which is attempting to create a fully tileable noise, so that will tile in X and Y. So if I was to use the tile node, for example, it's seamless in X and it's seamless in Y. Although the patterns will repeat, obviously, because it's just tiling the same texture, but that's attempting to make a seamless texture. And then finally, you can use a position pass. So I've got this position pass of this rabbit. If I switch that input to custom position, it's generating a noise on that rabbit. And surprisingly, looks like, oh, I'm using a normal, sorry. Connect that to the position pass. And I might need to shuffle my alpha in there. There we go. No, it doesn't look like much of a noise because it's a very large noise compared to the size of the rabbit. But changing that scale up.
So do you commonly use this as masks for like dirt or breaking up specularity and such things, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's just sort of like a seamless noise that can be, it's based on the position pass. You've got the two types of noise, or turbulence or FBM. It's all the same control that you'd get in a regular, I based it exactly on the same control, so that's all the same octaves, linearity, gain in Luma. Z is different because the basic noise is essentially a 3D noise, and when you control that Z, it's almost like you're moving your 3D noise in the Z direction. So it's like it's a card, a 3D card in a 3D noise that you're moving in Z, and that's rendering the noise that's going through on the card. but because we're based on a 3D image, we're already using that third dimension to get the noise there. So we had to add a fourth dimension, and I've just called it boiling, but that's this equivalent of what the Z does in the noise, but that's a fourth dimension essentially. So it's using MAD algorithm for 4D noise, and so XYZ controls. I can offset my rabbit in X, Y, move that noise up and down. But yeah, if we use the Z control the same way as the regular noise one, it just looks like the texture is sliding instead of actually evolving. So that's why that controls that fourth dimension, but essentially it's all based on the same noise. Guess that's a good transition into the vector tools. Now, for those that are still following, the vector tools are a little bit more technical. They're not all meant to be used on a daily basis. A lot of them are more useful for building other tools, unless you want to achieve something very custom. I think FX artists and people who use Houdini tend to quite enjoy using them, those that I talk to, because it's very similar to some of the things that Houdini let you do by controlling vectors directly or matrices directly as attributes. So the idea behind those tools is that we have all these math operations that are based on 4x4 matrices, 2D vectors, and 3D vectors. And we have a few operations that we can do on axis as well. And then some conversion that lets you go from certain formats to other formats, and generation for empty ones. So very basic one, like a generate STMap. That will just give you a blank STMap that you can use to run distortions on, or you can use as a base for your lens distortion workflow, anything you want. That just has a overscan control, and it's just a blank STMap. Useful, not very advanced, but it's one. We've got generated blank matrix, and that's a bit more complex. Our matrices have, essentially, if you are familiar with a matrix, you can look at an axis, for example. Every transformation that you do in your axis is affecting your matrix down there. And what we do is represent these values on each pixel of the image. And so basically we need to have these 16 values that represent a matrix, which represent a 3D transform. And each pixel of the image encodes those values. So we have 4 layers. So a default matrix, if I just reset all that to default, a default matrix is always 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. Like we've got this diagonal of ones. And so our red channel on the matrix 0 represents this column, and then this is the green, blue, alpha, red, green, blue, alpha, red, green, blue, alpha, and red, green, blue, alpha. So right now the red channel in matrix 0 is red, and then the green channel in matrix 1, and then the blue in matrix 2, and the alpha in matrix 1. So that corresponds to that exact same diagonal here. Now this can be modified and then used to transform other things like a position pass or something. So I prepared a little example earlier with the rabbit's position pass. We can put that position pass to position 2 points, and crash. All right, and through the magic of editing, looks like we never crashed. So for some reason, very frequently when I look at my position 2 point, I tend to crash. But
Which happened again.
And we're back. So if you see a sudden cut, it's because I crashed again. My laptop does not lack position 2 points, but this is the position pass of our rabbit put into position 2 points. Now, using our generate matrix 4, I can generate a blank matrix, and using some other tools that we're going to cover in a minute, I can generate some crazy vectors that look like nothing. Oh, because they're very tiny. So I can use these vectors that I've generated here to rotate the matrix. Now, we don't really see anything happening here, but if we were to go and look at our matrix here, and I was to grade this a bit higher, so not 0, let's say just 1. Oh, maybe that's not enough. As I start to increase the values here, stuff is happening to my matrix, and you can see all these crazy values happening. And I'm using these vectors to rotate the matrix, and then I use that matrix back to transform my vectors. And so what that gives us is this rabbit is starting to, some crazy stuff is happening. And what's happening here is that actually I'm rotating certain values. And hopefully we don't crash by doing this. So as you can see, as I increase this grade, 5, I should reduce my number of points. Go down to 0.1. As I increase this grade, the rabbit sort of starts to swirl in some interesting ways. So those tools definitely require you to kind of know what you're doing, but they're quite interesting to play with something like a point render, and you can have a position pass and you want to render some crazy rabbit explosion. You can do something like that. Some other stuff we can do with the matrix is not crash again, please. I can scale it, I can transform it, I can invert it. So if I invert this, put it here, I'm just going to view it first so that hopefully it doesn't crash. Now if I connect that one here, I found that the position 2 point doesn't really like it when you change the things as you're viewing the 3D. But yeah, so if I invert, it's just kind of the opposite of the other one that we had.
Could you give a practical example in your experience working as a compositor where you've implemented this?
Those tools I've mostly used with 3D either to fix up 3D or to do crazy interesting stuff with the position 2 points and render that as an FX.
Okay, so some kind of like, wizardry like type effect type thing, or
yeah, stuff like that.
And when you say fix effect or fix 3D, how does something become broken and need to be fixed from 3D?
It's not so much fixed. It might be that you are missing a pass that you don't have. Yeah, obviously, if you're missing a pass, you don't have it. Sorry, it's getting late. Sorry. you can essentially say you have this position pass and you need to rotate it for some reason, or you have a object position pass, you need a world position pass, or you have a world position pass, you need an object position pass, or camera view, etc. So you can control this. So using those metrics, those pixel matrices, you essentially can create one transform per pixel, and that's why the thing is getting distorted in crazy swirly ways. But the more simple way to do that is to use, I can use an axis, for example, and switch this transform vector to not using the pixel matrix, but use the axis. And now this axis will just essentially move my object in space. So if I start value, if I start moving my axis, it will move my position point. You can scale it, rotate it, essentially do most operations that you might want to do. You can do them there. So that's a lot more frequent that I would use. It's essentially using the same matrix on every single pixel, and this allows you to use a different axis per pixel. This is essentially what's happening there, trying to generate one axis per pixel. So in the tools here that we have for there, you can transform the vector. So that's what I was using. If you only want to rotate but not translate or scale, you can simply use a rotate. So it's very sticky. And I can say I just want to rotate 90 degree in Y. And it just rotates 90 degree in Y. You have some things just to get, for example, the magnitude of a vector 3, which is telling you how far your vector is from 0, 0, 0. It's not super useful in this situation, but it could be useful in others. There is a normalized vector that makes every vector length 1, which essentially means this rabbit right now would be mapped to a sphere. So if I look at this in position 2 point, it's going to be a spherical rabbit. This is useful for normals, for example, because normals are always normalized. So if I put a, sorry, I keep clicking the wrong button. It's very sticky. If I normalize my normals, nothing's going to happen because my normals, by definition, are already normalized. That just means that the magnitude is 1. So if I take that magnitude and plug it there, I'll just get a value of 1 everywhere. Where if I put this on this guy, it was different length. But if I do it after it's been normalized, the length is 1 everywhere. If you know vector math, you might know what to do with that. If you don't, then I really highly recommend looking up Khan Academy has some free classes on vectors and matrices, and I think that's how I learned, and I think it's very useful. Interestingly enough, you can take any image and just imagine that each pixel is a vector, and you can normalize this as well. And what that does is flattening your whole image so you can only see these flat colors. And if you were to get the magnitude of that, you end up with sort of a black and white. It's not exactly the same as desaturating, and it will be like slightly different from saturation node, just because saturation node is using different math to try to respect how we perceive brightness. This is just a pure different operations, but you can multiply these two back and get back to your original image. So these are sort of complementary operations. But yeah, you can do stuff and like modify this and see how it affects there. We have the same for 2D vectors, and I was preparing an example somewhere that I might have lost. Here it is. So I do have this thing called Luma to Vector. And this takes the brightness of the image and try to convert that into normals, essentially, 3D normals. And you can control the intensity of the normals. You can control, actually, I'll show that on the plate. It might be interesting. So if I plug this into your plate, let's say I want to extract this rock texture and relight it or do something with it. I can make sure I open this one. I can crank the intensity a bit after it lets me click. And right now I might want to separate a bit more. I'm only getting all these really fine details, but I'm not getting any overall shape. So this is what this detail separation controls do here. And this is actually blurring the image and trying to get sort of like lower frequency
sort of like macro detail frequency.
Yeah. But then you can reintroduce the details. It's sort of blending the maps. And so by doing that, you can get sort of like the big rocks, but also keep this fine texture. And this I can use, for example, with another of the spin tools. There's that relight simple. If you plug that as a normals map, you can sort of just quickly go here and try to relight some of that stuff.
Very nice. Yeah, I did fiddle with that a little bit. I was like, Luma to Vector, that's kind of cool. How would you use that? And I'm thinking, you know, just I'll leave it up to you to.
So yeah,
assuming it was a relighting.
Yeah. This is actually doing a Sobel filter on the Luma of your image. Sobel filter, you can look it up. It's some mathematician that created this filter that does that. It's how like all the, you know, like Photoshop has these like bas-relief type of effects. It's the same idea behind it. There's also many different implementations of many different tools. I think what is it called? Xavier Martin has the X-Distort. I forgot what it's called. That's doing sort of something like that, and it's using the same algorithm. There's a lot of them that are using this under the hood. You can use that with with Relight. You can also use that for distorting images. So for example, if I get this image right here, I can plug that into iDistort. Not iDistort. So with the iDistort, I've got to shuffle it in. So I make a copy. I'm going to take my checkerboard. I'm going to shuffle in the red into forward U and the green into forward V. And then I can say my UV channel is forward, and then start cranking that. And now you can sort, it's not enough, let's crank it even more. Starting to distort based on, oh, that was just on the noise. So if I plug it in the Luma 2 vector, I'm getting more of a, sorry, I think that's too much now. It's using that map. It's ignoring the blue channel, so we can kill the blue. That's more of a what you imagine of an ID stored map. Now, because this we're using as a 2D map, we can use all of the 2D vector tools here. For example, rotate, normalize, cross product, etc. So if I rotate those, just connect that to here. As I rotate these vectors, you can see that thing rotates in here. That's a good transition to the ID stored, which is recursive ID stored. So it's right now, if I crank this ID stored a lot,
so it's sort of like an upgrade or a different version of the original iDistort, but you call it iDistort.
It's and it's recursive, so it's doing an ID. It's essentially like if you were to do an ID stored on top of an ID stored on top of an ID stored. And the way the ID stored works is that it looks at your path there, at your vector path, and for each pixel in the image, let's say we look at this pixel right here, the ID stored will look at the vectors, and right here the vectors are 0.1 and minus 0.3, and so it will, and I've multiplied that by 500, so it's actually like, let's put this back to 1, and let's grade this by 500 instead. So now if I look at the pixel value, it's 62, don't want to clamp, 62 in X and minus 190 in Y. So it's going to take that pixel and it's going to look what's the pixel value 62 to the right and what was it, 180 to the bottom or something like that. And it's going to find that color and it's going to pull it right here. So that's what IDStore does by default. Now, as it does that, it's starting to duplicate things, and I'm going to turn that off again. And it's actually what oops, that's way too big. But it's a good illustration that it's starting to run out of things to pull. What mine does is that it will look at the vector, so at the same pixel, and if the vector say, go get the value here, then it's going to look at the vector here, and it's going to say, oh, this one wants the value from here, and this one wants the value from here, and this one wants the value from here. And it's going to pull all the way from there in a recursive manner. So we can see the difference of results. It's that the regular ID stored is producing this compared to this. So let's put the same 500 here. It's using the same map, but it's producing fairly different results. And it's doing more of a stretch, if you will. We can reduce the number of samples. If we go to one sample, we're going to get the same results as the ID sort. But as you crank the samples, you start getting different.
So it's almost like a repetitive additional sampling of the original iDistort, so that you get more of a smoother sort of result, so to speak.
Yeah, smoother is not the right term. It's just kind of a different effect. I quite like if you rotate this by 90 degrees, you usually end up. Oh, and do I have a clamp somewhere? What's going on? That's interesting. Those stretches.
And I will also link a video below that I watched personally that is done by Erwan that goes a little bit more in depth using Roto Paint smear brushstrokes, which is really cool. So you guys definitely want to check that out. I had a lot of fun with that one. You can do some really cool effects with it.
Yeah, so when you rotate your vectors by 90 degrees, you usually end up getting these cool swirls. So I'm going to reduce that a bit. So yeah, just
Can I
rotating
put you on the
this.
Can I put you on the spot and ask, have you ever used this in a movie that you've worked on? Where you're like, oh yeah, it's really.
I have, yes, I have actually. I used that on Christmas Chronicles to create some auroras in the sky and get them swirly. Not exactly this technique, but something inspired by this. I don't think I can talk too much about it, but yeah, just kind of like getting nice distortions, nice moving effects. So that's the II distort. What else did we have? Do you want to cover anything in particular? Or did you have any questions? I've just been rambling and rambling.
No, I mean that's fine. If you want to jump to the questions, we could finish
Yeah.
up with the questions if that's cool. Thanks again for the demo.
Let's do that.
I mean, it's a very unconventional sort of things we see. Some like deep internal sort of tool sets, but it's stuff that every compositor I think needs to start getting their getting their feet wet in. So let
I
me.
guess another tool set we could quickly talk about is the last one I put on Nukepedia, which is all the network node graph organizing tools. Essentially got these tools here, so we can say like distribute nodes, line up nodes different ways, do that, and the fun one that people have liked was the scaling. I think people have been interested in that thing. But yeah, that's on Nukepedia as well as of last month, and just a bunch of tools for aligning stuff, putting backdrops with labels.
What is that? What specifically is that called in Nukepedia for them to look up? I mean, I'll post
terribly.
it at the bottom, but
Oh, that's broken. Hey, congratulations. I gotta fix it. That is called node graph utils.
that's it. Yeah, no, I did see that. And then you get that little very peculiar button at the top.
Yes, you get the little button.
Cool. Well, we could, if it's okay with you, we'll jump into the questions, and it's getting to be a long night here. Again, thanks to Erwan for staying up late here. So we have AP Manti 12. It says, Man, Erwan is such a legend. His spin tools are awesome. I really like his spill correct and edge extender. I don't really have any specific questions, but if you could show some unorthodox cool techniques and dive into tech, that would be awesome, which I think we accomplished, at least within the time frame.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliments. And also I want to thank Spin again for allowing me to share these tools, because not every studio is willing to let you share stuff that you've done while on their payroll. So
Yeah, that was a nice one. Shiva S says, my question is, as a compositor, which you're currently not a compositor, but as a compositor, theoretically, where can I start in Unreal, and do you believe Unreal can bring a big change in the compositing world?
it's a heavy question. I can't foresee the future. I'm a big fan of Unreal myself. I've been playing around with it quite a bit. Haven't done much compositing in Unreal, and I don't know how much it affects compositing in itself. It's definitely really cool that you can do a lot of things almost live, and so the need for compositing is reduced when you don't have to fix CG in comp. The point of fixing CG in comp is always that you don't have time to re-render, and so you're on a deadline and you've got to tweak it and make it work without going back through a 2-hour render a frame or something like that. So there's definitely really good opportunities there if compositors get familiar with Unreal, that they can create the final image, tweaking the 3D itself. There's not a lot of really compositing tools in Unreal yet. It's got a few things with color grading and a few things like that. And then Bridge with Nuke is pretty cool. It's just more streaming images from Unreal to Nuke and then using that in Nuke, but I can see that getting used like fairly quickly on smaller, more nimble teams of generalists that just want to quickly produce. I'm pretty sure like Game Cinematics probably going to be some of the first to really use that heavily.
Yeah, I believe the Foundry has a couple demos on that Bridge tool that they recently released, which is kind of cool. We're all sort of looking at this stuff going, where's this going to go? You know. Madlook VFX says, what all are the different processes in VFX which can be or might get automated in the future, according to you, just like now we have Roto plugins for rough matte creation?
Okay, so I'm guessing he's talking about all these AI tools and all the invasion of Midjourney images in LinkedIn. And I'm always hesitant to try to predict the future. I definitely see AI coming to play a role in tools to assist artists. And a lot of the current tools that you see on the market, or not necessarily on the market, but you see people playing with the deepfakes and a lot of the image generation tools and other tools that are pretty cool. And one of the issues with them is they're not really can't really control them so much as you feed it some input and it gives you some result back. Even with Copycat and Nuke, you train it for certain things and then you feed it images and it does its thing. And if you're not happy with it, you go back and train again, and until maybe you manage to get what you need. That's really, really cool when it works. And I've seen some really cool uses of Copycat and other deepfakes technology, etc. But then when it doesn't work, you just got nothing. You can't go anywhere with it. I'm really hoping for tools that empower AI to assist with creation. And, there's a bit of a gap right now between the fully automated AI tools and the manual tools that we use generally. And what I'm hoping to see is the two coming together, where you might have Roto tools that creates a curve, but then actually snaps the curve automatically that you can still edit afterwards and stuff like that. Because right now, all the like Rotobot from Sam Hodge has made this plugin Rotobot, which is really, really cool, and it's doing all this fully AI-based matting and extraction.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting a rasterized image. You're not getting a vector.
You're getting a rasterized image, so you can't tweak it, and that's where I think the next step that I would like to see is getting more controls.
Well, personally, I took an AI class, this brand new class at Purdue University, and this is not compositors. This consists of a lot of like Python programmer students, PhD master students, and I literally had my head blown off by what I was seeing and what the students were doing, building with code and all this, and just seeing a little glimpse of the future. And I had an insanely super genius PhD teacher who is right on the forefront of this technology, just to see where it's going. And the students were actually building tool sets and even seeing like the vector integration, where it's no longer this, here's a rasterized image, good luck, like when they create these alphas for the roto, for rotoscoping, it's, black and white, but it's always like this grayish mess if you don't have enough, if you didn't train it enough, and all this. And it's like, well, I can't use that. I need something that I could tweak. So the tweakability in AI is something that, where you get this feedback back and forth with you and AI saying, oh, let me tweak that, and then it goes back and fixes the tweak, Yeah,
one of the ones I've seen recently was there's been all the nerfs that people have been creating, and it's, if you haven't seen it, it's kind of like, you can almost thinking as the same way as like photogrammetry, where you take multiple photos of a scene or an object, and then where photogrammetry will try to recreate a geometry. The nerfs don't bother about geometry. They just kind of generates an image that you can rotate around. And that's been sort of like every few months there's been a new paper that improves on the previous one for that one thing. And I was reading one from Google just a few days ago, and they've really improved it to a point where it's becoming quite good. And that's from these photos you can extract a depth pass, you can extract, you can move the camera, you can reposition the camera, all the reflections follow, all the stuff kind of like works. And I think that might be an alternative in the fairly near future, whenever it can be done at the right resolution for like background replacements and stuff like that. So instead of having, all these shows that say, oh, we're trying to be in New York, but we're shooting on a green screen studio somewhere in Atlanta, you could like do a nerf of your location and then just comp your actors in there instead of having to do CG or having to do like plates with the camera move or reproject and everything. Instead of projecting, you just put a camera in your nerf image.
Wow. So this is a NERF, you said? NERF?
NERF.
Okay. Google it.
The latest, the latest paper from Google research on that is really, really impressive.
Wow, that's cool. Got Sergio Lugo here. Not a question, but a fun story. We added a nod to Spin in our reel to thank them for their amazing gizmos. That's cool.
I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
Karan Kanase, hi bro, please make a... Never mind, this guy's saying make a video on Nuke or something. And I think I responded with, I already did. So so with that, we will end tonight. Again, thanks again, Erwan, for taking, kind of pulling out a busy schedule. I know it took some time to, have you on, but thanks for sticking with me. Last week I ditched you accidentally. I'm like, oh crap. But being a trooper, just waiting another week, and it's been great. I think we'll probably end it there. If you have any other thing to say to anybody, or kind of a closure. Nope.
No, thanks for having me. This was really a lot more reliable than the last conversation we had 3 years ago, where I was on free Wi-Fi in a museum trying to scramble to hear you and having all these children screaming around. So it's nice to...
That was still really great. If you ever get a chance to check it out, I think it was Ask the VFX Pros. It's a really great, to interview regardless. So, and we're always happy to have you on again. But with that said, I think we'll close it up. Thanks a bunch, sir, and we'll see you later, 3 years from now.
Have a good one.
All right.